Not far from Dallas stands a small, unremarkable village. But there is one house there. The events that took place in it are remembered by the oldest residents with tears in their eyes. Sometime in the 1930s, there lived a family, a husband, a wife, and 2 children. Everything seemed normal, but every evening neighbors heard screams and shouting. The husband beat his family, even for minor offenses. The wife walked around with bruises and scratches, always in torn clothes. Their son had almost all his teeth knocked out, and the daughter had her hair cut to pieces with scissors. All the villagers had long been telling them to leave him, promising support from the entire village, and finally, unable to bear the abuse any longer, she gathered her belongings, dressed the children, and decided to leave. But it was not to be. Seeing this, the husband grabbed the woman and locked her in the attic. For 3 days, she knocked on the window, and for 3 days, the children cried incessantly. Local men tried to approach the house, but they were threatened with gunshots. This went on for another 2 days. But then everything stopped, and a dead silence fell over the house. One old man gathered his strength and went inside, but soon he came out screaming for help. The residents say that the woman died of starvation. Her body was found near the attic window, and the man drowned the children in a barrel he had brought from the yard. They believe that their cries drove him to madness, and realizing his mistakes, he hanged himself in the house. Now, anyone passing by at night hears a faint knock on the attic window, and looking up, they see the fleeting figure of a woman. Also at night, neighboring houses hear the bitter crying of the children. But the most horrifying thing is when you stand in that house, even during the day, you can hear the creak of a body hanging from a rope. This story happened to me for real 2 years ago. Now I'm 17. A lot of things happened to me, and I want to share. It was winter, January. We have a big apartment, lived with my father, mother, and 2 younger brothers, one 12, the other 2 years old. Like I said, the apartment is big, with 3 rooms. On that day, January 12th, my mom and I were playing with the baby swinging. So, I noticed a woman, about 25 years old, looking at me without blinking. She was pretty, so to speak. My mom was busy with the baby at the slide, and I sat on a bench nearby. I occasionally glanced at the woman, and she kept looking. After a few minutes, she got up and approached me, whispering, "What was mine will be yours." I vividly remember her words. They echoed in my head. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but the woman just walked away. When we were going home, I told my mom, but naturally she didn't believe it, saying it was nonsense. We stood at the crosswalk, waiting for the traffic light to turn green. I stood silently, thinking about the woman's words and what she meant. Lost in thought, I stared blankly downward. When I sighed and raised my head, what did I see? People surrounded me, covered in blood. I jerked in fright, shocked, my breath caught. Even my mother and brother were covered in blood. Someone's arm was broken, someone's neck. It was a nightmare. I wanted to scream like a mad woman. My mother started talking to me, and she was covered in blood, as if only I could see it. I closed my eyes, shook my head, and when I opened my eyes, everything was normal again. People looked at me in bewilderment, probably thinking I was crazy, but I really saw it. My mother started scolding me for my behavior. I begged her, pleaded with her not to cross the road, even delaying her. I remember my words, "Mommy, please, my dear, don't cross the road, let's wait." I never called my mother mommy or my dear. It's not like me, but at that moment something inside me flipped. Still, I didn't let her cross the road, pulling her towards me. People started crossing the road when suddenly a truck didn't stop, drove on, hitting the people walking on the road. My mother was in shock, as was I. I don't know what it was, but whatever it was, it helped save my family. After we were all amazed at home, told everyone, etc., we decided to go to Auntie's tomorrow. She's, roughly speaking, a medium, and went to bed. At night, I fell asleep with difficulty, I remember a dream, if it can even be called a dream. I got out of bed, it was dark around, I heard children's laughter, opened the door, and left the room. I stood at the long corridor leading to the hall. These children were playing with a ball. I didn't know them for sure. Looking at me, they slowly started to disappear, but for some reason I wasn't scared, but went further. There was silence, driving me crazy. Finally, I decided to look into my parents' room, where my younger brother was sleeping too. I slowly opened the door, looking around the room. I noticed a long, thin shadow on the wall. It was looking at me. I asked what it wanted, and it just pointed at my parents and the child. I trembled. Then it seemed to me that the shadow was smiling wickedly. Everything was so real. Then I saw smoke in the house. I woke up abruptly, covered in cold sweat. It was hard to breathe. The room was filled with smoke. Something was burning. I started screaming, waking everyone up. Later, it turned out that things were burned near the entrance to the apartment. How? No one knows. A person in a dream doesn't feel the smell of smoke, and you can die from it. The same would have happened to my family if I hadn't woken up. 2 years later, I realized that I owe it to that strange woman. After that night, my world turned upside down. Of course, this horror continues even now, but I won't despair. And now let them prove to me that a person doesn't shape their destiny. My story, as they say, is from our world, and there's no mysticism in it, but at that moment I was truly scared. In my youth, I played hockey. One day of the week, practice would end quite late, around 10 p.m. Then there would be showers, changing clothes, chatting with the guys, and suddenly it's already 11 p.m. And in winter, it's even later, a dark, cold time of day. So, one night I was returning from such a late training session, end of November. Time was around midnight. I missed my bus, and who knows when the next one would come, or if it would come at all. I decided to walk, not too far from home, about 5 to 6 kilometers. I walked halfway, and then there were two options, either to walk along the lit highway or go downhill through the park and under the highway bridge. The second path was more direct. Without thinking twice, I started downhill, turning on the flashlight function on my phone along the way. I'm walking. It's dark around, only a small circle of my flashlight ahead of me. Suddenly, I hear behind me a quiet, rhythmic clicking on the asphalt. I turn around and see a dog. It also stopped and waited. I yelled at it, but it didn't move from its spot. We stood like that for a minute. Then I cursed at it, tightened my grip on my hockey stick, and continued walking. And it started running behind me, but at a distance. It followed me like that through the entire park to the bridge, and that's where the scariest part began. Under the bridge, it was pitch black. Moreover, cars were constantly passing overhead, and their rumble echoed loudly below. So, whether you scream or not, no one would hear. I didn't dare to go under such a bridge with some dog on my tail. I decided to shoo it away first, throw stones at it, beat it up, I don't know, but it was starting to get on my nerves. But when I turned around, my hair stood on end. Out of the darkness, in the glimmer of the flashlight, a whole pack was staring at me, 5 or 6 dog shadows, maybe even more. The biggest dog, lowering its neck and raising its head, slowly, without making a sound, began to creep towards me, carefully moving its paws. I yelled curses as loudly as I could. Several growls emerged from the darkness, some guttural howling, when a dog's bark turns into a howl. I swear I almost wet my pants. After that incident, I realized that our instincts from primitive times haven't disappeared, because I acted afterward almost automatically, as if I had to fend off wild animals every day. With one hand, I pulled my sports bag from my back and pressed it against my stomach and chest, simultaneously holding my glowing phone, my back against the concrete support of the bridge, and my hockey stick ready for a strike. I didn't know what I would have done if I had played soccer instead of hockey. But those who have held a long, flat hockey stick in their hands know that it's not the best weapon to wield with one hand, especially for a strike from above downward. The dog began to growl deeply and continued to advance towards me. I was absolutely sure that the pack planned to drive me under the bridge. They really wanted me to run there. My imagination painted a picture for me, as if they were silently urging me through their yellow fangs. Come on, come quickly. There into the darkness. Then the big dog lunged at me, but at the very last moment, snapping its teeth in front of my flashlight, it abruptly recoiled to the side. My reaction was good. I swung the stick, but missed. It was a very fast dog. More precisely, I hit it, but not directly on the skull as I intended. The stick just slid off, hit the asphalt with all its force, and cracked loudly. The dogs, apparently realizing that I wouldn't leave and would fight, began to surround me. And that dog, perhaps he was the leader, moved like a wolf in a cage, back and forth, never taking its eyes off me. I love animals, especially dogs, but I swear, if I had met him during the day somewhere, I would have mercilessly beaten him to death with a brick. Because at that moment I felt like in his eyes, I was just a big, stupid piece of meat, and he was not a man's best friend, just a hungry, smelly beast with an empty stomach, who really wanted to eat and was growling with impatience, just like the whole pack. I waved the stick in front of me. There was a thought to call someone, but I didn't want to stay in the dark, and besides, who would I call, and who would find me so quickly and help me? So, I just waved the stick and shouted at the top of my lungs. Then it surprised me that the dogs didn't bark at all, only growled quietly and acted like a well-trained military assault brigade. Without making unnecessary noises, they either lunged or disappeared into the darkness again, flickering before the flashlight. And all of this in complete silence. Only the rustling of leaves could be heard, and only my cries broke this operation of theirs, which was probably called dinner under the bridge. One mutt wanted either to bite my hand or knock the flashlight, and it rushed straight at me. I kicked it in the stomach, and it, making some gurgling sound, flew off. Only the stick kept them at bay. If it hadn't been for it, I don't even want to think about it. These dances lasted for about 10 minutes. I felt like strength was leaving me in leaders, although in training we could play and fight for hours, and here only 10 minutes. This is what an unprepared psyche means. I don't know how it would have ended, but suddenly a bottle flew out of nowhere and clattered loudly against the asphalt. Then another one flew in the same way and hit the dog, which yelped loudly. Hoarse voices and a stream of swearing followed. This swearing was music to my ears and seemed like the most wonderful music. The dogs, one by one, darted into the darkness. Only the leader still stood there, snarling at me and then towards the voices. I snapped out of it and, dropping my bag, went on the offensive, rushed at the dog, and with all my might struck diagonally across its legs with the stick. It dodged again, but got hit on the hind leg, yelped, and dissolved into the nearest bushes. I was breathing heavily. Two bearded men with a strong smell of alcohol approached me. I wouldn't even dare to call them derogatory names like bums now. One hoarsely said, "What, brother, did they corner you like a deer?" and chuckled. I mumbled something incoherent, then said, "Thank you." They asked for cigarettes, but I didn't smoke, so I gave them money and a pack of Snickers. Out of happiness, I didn't even realize that they, just like those dogs, could knock me down here, and no one would hear. I just rummaged in the pocket of my jacket and handed over all the money, about $15 or so. Then I thanked them again and staggered back to the highway. The guy stayed there. That's the story. In general, don't walk at night in deserted places unless you really have to, even if you are a confident athlete with a stick in hand.